Eala sparks a massive debate after her Wimbledon clash, and the tennis world is divided. It wasn't the loss that split opinion, it was what came after. Two legends, two completely different verdicts on the same match. One BBC graphic, one tactical decision, and suddenly everyone from Martina Navratilova to Laura Robson had something to say. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why a single serving pattern turned Eala's round of 16 exit into the most talked about tactical debate of Wimbledon 2026, and why the answer isn't as simple as anyone thinks. To understand why this debate exploded the way it did, you have to understand what Eala had already done before she ever stepped onto center court to face Jasmine Paolini. Eala arrived at Wimbledon 2026 seeded 29th, respectable but nowhere near the spotlight. Then she did something no Filipino player had ever done in the Open era. In the third round, she dismantled Iga Świątek, the 2025 Wimbledon champion and third seed, in straight sets. Not a fluke, not a scare, a statement win, delivered on the biggest stage in tennis, against a woman who had lifted the trophy just 12 months earlier. Back home, the reaction was seismic. Over 1 million people in the Philippines streamed the highlights within hours. President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. posted his congratulations. The Department of Tourism celebrated her as a symbol of what Filipino athletes could achieve on the world's biggest stages. And in the royal box, watching it all unfold, sat Roger Federer himself, the man Eala considers an idol, the man whose academy she'd trained in years earlier alongside Świątek. That's the part people forget when they talk about what happened next. Eala wasn't just playing a match, she was playing the biggest match of her life, one round after the biggest win of her career less than 48 hours earlier, a nation watching, Federer watching, and an opponent who had every motivation in the world to make a statement of her own. Nobody expected the match to be simple. What nobody predicted was that it wouldn't be the scoreline that dominated headlines the next morning. It would be 4 numbers from a graphic on a BBC broadcast, numbers that would turn one of the greatest champions in tennis into a very public critic, and split opinion across the entire sport. Because sometimes the real drama in tennis doesn't happen on the scoreboard, it happens in the numbers underneath it. Here's where things start to get complicated, and where the seeds of the controversy were quietly planted in real time for anyone paying close enough attention. The match itself was tight from the start. 2 hours and 22 minutes of hard-fought tennis, decided by the smallest of margins. Eala took the first set. Paolini answered by taking the second. It came down to a decisive third, the kind of tennis that reminds you why Grand Slam tournaments exist in the first place. But buried inside that battle was a statistic that would end up mattering more than almost anyone realized in the moment. Eala converted just 3 of her 10 breakpoint chances, 10 opportunities to seize control of the match, 3 converted. In a contest this close, that's not a footnote, that's potentially the entire story. And then came the graphic. At 4-3 in the second set, the BBC broadcast put up a serve placement breakdown for Eala. The numbers were specific, and they were revealing. Eala was hitting her serve out wide on the advantage side only 33% of the time. On the deuce side, she was going down the tee just 37% of the time. In plain terms, her serve patterns were more predictable than perhaps they needed to be against an opponent as sharp as Paolini. Now, on its own, that's just data. Broadcasters put up serve breakdowns all the time. Most viewers watched it, processed it, and moved on with the match. But this particular graphic didn't just sit there quietly. It caught the eye of one of the most decorated players in the history of the sport, someone who has forgotten more about serve strategy than most players will ever learn. Martina Navratilova, a 9-time Wimbledon singles champion, a voice that carries enormous weight anywhere it appears in tennis commentary. And when she saw that graphic, she didn't stay quiet. She questioned, on the record, why Eala was serving the way she was, confused by the pattern, confused by the decision-making, publicly puzzled by what she was watching unfold on center court. This is the moment the story shifts. Up until this point, this was simply a tense, competitive Grand Slam match between two in-form players. From this point forward, it becomes something else entirely. A conversation about strategy, about scrutiny, and about what it means when a legend of the sport publicly questions the tactics of a 21-year-old playing in just her first fourth-round Grand Slam match. Because once Martina Navratilova says a decision is crazy on a broadcast watched by millions, that clip doesn't just disappear into the archive, it travels, it gets shared, it gets debated. And for Eala, a player who had spent the entire tournament being celebrated as tennis's most likable breakout star, the tone around her name was suddenly, unexpectedly shifting. The question now wasn't just, did Eala lose? It was, did Eala lose because of something she could have controlled? And that question was about to divide some of the most respected voices in the sport. Let's sit inside that moment for a second, because this is where the real controversy takes shape. Navratilova's comments weren't a vague disappointment. They were specific, technical, and pointed. Her core argument centered on the wide serve, particularly on the advantage side. Her read was that if Eala's serve didn't have overwhelming pace behind it, sending it out wide was handing Paolini, one of the best returners on the WTA Tour, an invitation to strike a clean backhand winner. In Navratilova's eyes, this wasn't a marginal inefficiency. It was a strategic miscalculation happening at the exact moments the match hung in the balance. And here's what makes this so fascinating from a storytelling perspective. This isn't outside noise from someone disconnected from the sport. This is Martina Navratilova, a legend who won at the very venue where this match was being played multiple times over against the very best players of her generation. When she raises a tactical red flag, tennis fans listen, commentators amplify it. And within hours, clips of her remarks were circulating far beyond the broadcast booth. Social media did what social media does. Fans picked apart the serve graphic themselves. Some agreed entirely with Navratilova, arguing that a 21-year-old with less serve speed simply couldn't afford to gamble on predictable wide patterns against a returner like Paolini. Others pushed back immediately, arguing that hindsight bias was doing a lot of heavy lifting in the discourse. It's easy to point at a losing pattern after the match is over. It's much harder to say with certainty what the correct pattern would have produced in real time against a live opponent adjusting shot by shot. But then the debate escalated again, because this time it wasn't just fans and pundits weighing in, it was another legend of the sport. Laura Robson, the former British #1 and Olympic silver medalist, watched the same match, saw the same graphic, and reached the exact opposite conclusion. Robson's argument was rooted in a different read of Eala's game entirely. Her point was that Eala doesn't possess elite raw serve pace, and because of that, going out wide on the advantage side without enough velocity behind it is actually the riskier decision, not the safer one. In Robson's assessment, if that wide serve doesn't move enough off the grass, it simply sits in Paolini's strike zone, and Paolini is precisely the kind of returner who punishes exactly that kind of ball on her backhand side. Two legends, two directly conflicting tactical philosophies, both grounded in real analysis, both delivered publicly, both about the exact same set of decisions inside the exact same match. This is the moment Eala lost a tennis match, quietly transformed into something much bigger, a genuine, unresolved argument among some of the greatest minds in the sport about what smart tennis even looks like under pressure. And Eala, the 21-year-old at the center of it all, was about to find herself talked about in a completely different way than she had been just 48 hours earlier after beating a defending champion. Now, here's where the story takes its most human turn, because while two legends were publicly disagreeing about her tactics, Eala had to actually process a heartbreaking loss in real time, in front of the entire tennis world. Picture the split-screen reality of this moment. On one side, a legitimate high-level tactical debate playing out across broadcasts and social media, with Navratilova and Robson essentially trading arguments through the press about serve patterns and risk management. On the other side, a 21-year-old walking off center court having just watched her historic run end in a third-set battle she came agonizingly close to winning. This is where the tennis world divided framing becomes even more layered than a simple disagreement over strategy. Because the discourse wasn't just splitting over tactics, it was splitting over tone. How much scrutiny does a breakout player deserve after a career best result? Is it fair to dissect a 21-year-old's serving stats mere hours after the biggest win of her career, only to lose a tight three-setter? Felt disproportionate, even unfair. Others countered that scrutiny is simply what comes with success at this level, and that Eala should actually welcome the fact that legends like Navratilova care enough to analyze her game in this kind of detail. After all, you don't get dissected by 9-time Wimbledon champions unless people believe you belong on that stage. And in the middle of all of it stood the numbers that started this entire conversation. 3 converted breakpoints out of 10 chances, a stat that on its own tells you the story of a match decided by fine margins. Margins so fine that reasonable, brilliant tennis minds could look at the exact same moments and draw entirely opposite conclusions about what went wrong. That's the uncomfortable truth sitting underneath this entire debate. In matches this close, there often isn't one correct answer. There's a version of events where Navratilova is right, and different serve patterns turn 1 or 2 of those breakpoints in Eala's favor. And there's an equally plausible version where Robson is right, and altering that pattern would have handed Paolini even easier looks at her powerful backhand. Nobody can rewind center court and rerun the match with a different set of variables. And that unresolved uncertainty, legends disagreeing, fans split down the middle, a young player caught in the crossfire of a debate she never asked to be part of, is exactly what kept this story alive for days after the final point was played. But amid all this noise, one voice remained conspicuously calm, and that voice belonged to Alex Eala herself. While legends argued and timelines debated to serve statistics, Alex Eala sat down for her press conference and delivered something the entire chaotic conversation around her had been missing: perspective. When asked directly about the match, Eala didn't deflect and she didn't make excuses. Her words were measured, honest, and remarkably self-aware for someone barely 21 years old. She acknowledged there were things she would have liked to do differently. She talked about how Paolini made her uncomfortable in key moments, how her serve wasn't at its best that day, and how that's simply part of competing at this level. What stood out most was her framing of imperfection. She said she understood she wasn't going to play her best tennis every single day, that everyone has days like that, and that it's part of the job. Rather than spiraling into the noise surrounding her tactical choices, she took ownership of her performance while refusing to treat one difficult day as a referendum on her entire game. This is the moment where the story finds its emotional center, because while Navratilova and Robson were debating serve mechanics from the outside, Eala was doing something far harder, sitting with a gutting loss in front of cameras mere minutes after it happened, and responding with grace instead of defensiveness. She spoke about pride and how she handled the pressure of the tournament. She spoke about controlling her emotions when it mattered most, and she made it clear that, win or lose, her focus was already shifting forward, toward the next tournament, the next opportunity, the next step in a career she clearly believes is only getting started. This is where the tactical debate and the human story collide in the most revealing way possible. Because whether Navratilova's read on the serve patterns was correct, or whether Robson's counterargument holds up under scrutiny, neither legend was in that arena facing down championship-level pressure with a nation watching. Eala was, and her response to adversity, measured, mature, forward-looking, became its own quiet answer to the noise surrounding her. It's worth asking, would this debate even be happening if Eala hadn't played the tournament of her life just days earlier? Would two legends be publicly dissecting her serve patterns if she hadn't already proven she belonged on the same court as a defending Wimbledon champion? In a strange way, the entire controversy is proof of how far she's already come. Nobody debates the tactics of a player nobody expects anything from. And that's exactly why what happened next, the reaction to how she handled the loss itself, turned out to be just as significant as the debate over what happened during it. So, where does that leave this story? A 21-year-old walks into Wimbledon as the 29th seed. She knocks out a defending champion in the biggest win of her career. She reaches the fourth round for the first time in her life, a milestone no Filipino player had achieved before her in the Open era. She loses a tight 3-set battle to a proven Grand Slam finalist. And in the aftermath, two tennis legends look at the exact same data and reach completely opposite conclusions about what she should have done differently. That's not a story about failure. That's a story about a player good enough and visible enough to become the subject of genuine tactical debate among the greatest minds in the sport, and gracious enough in the same 48 hours to be praised for how she handled it all. Maybe that's the real takeaway here. The scoreline said Paolini won. The debate said Navratilova and Robson couldn't agree, but the bigger picture said something else entirely. Alex Eala left Wimbledon 2026 with a career-high ranking, a signature win over a defending champion, and a reputation that somehow grew even in defeat. Was this really a debate about serve patterns and breakpoints, or was it proof that Alex Eala has officially arrived on tennis's biggest stage, good enough now that even legends can't agree on how to beat her? That's a question worth sitting with, and it's one only time and Eala's next chapter will truly answer. If this story pulled you in, make sure you're subscribed, because Alex Eala's rise is only just getting started, and you won't want to miss what comes next. Drop your take in the comments. Was Navratilova right, or was Robson? Let us know below.